Welcome to part 2 of circulatory and respiratory systems, which focuses on the human cardiovascular system. The human heart has 2 atria and 2 ventricles, for a total of 4 chambers. The atria, remember, receive blood from the body, whereas the ventricles pump blood to the body. The right and left sides of the heart are completely separated. This is because the right side of the heart contains deoxygenated blood from the human body, whereas the left side of the heart contains highly oxygenated blood from the lungs. As you can imagine, mixing of deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood would not lead to a highly efficient oxygen exchange system in our bodies. Blood flows throughout the human body in 2 circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. The pulmonary circuit is responsible for oxygenating the blood by bringing low oxygenated blood from the body to the lungs for gas exchange. Specifically in this circuit, the right ventricle pumps blood through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged at lung capillaries, and finally the pulmonary veins bring oxygenated blood back to the heart into the left atria. Now that our blood is oxygenated, blood travels through the systemic circuit to supply oxygen and nutrients to organs and tissues, while picking up carbon dioxide and other waste products. In this circuit, the left ventricle pumps blood through a very large artery called the aorta. Blood then flows through the body, oxygenating organs and picking up waste products. And finally, blood returns to the heart into the right atrium in preparation for the return trip through the pulmonary circuit. The full roadmap of blood through the body, therefore, is as follows. The right atrium receives low oxygenated blood from the body from 2 large veins called the vena cavae. The heart pumps, and all the blood from the right atrium is forced into the right ventricle. The heart pumps again, and the blood is forced from the right ventricle into the pulmonary arteries en route to the lungs. The capillaries of the lungs is where carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen. Pulmonary veins then bring that highly oxygenated blood back to the heart and into the left atrium. The heart beats, forcing all the blood from the left atrium into the left ventricle. At this point, the heart will beat again and all the blood will be forced out of the left ventricle through a large artery called the aorta en route to body organs. The aorta will soon branch at a location called the brachiocephalic trunk. At this point, half of the blood will go to the head and upper body region, and the rest will flow downward through the aortic arch toward the lower portions of the body. Arteries will branch into arterioles that branch into capillaries. Capillaries then exchange oxygen and nutrients for carbon dioxide and waste products in body tissues and organs. Capillaries then merge to form venules and then further merge to become veins on the way back to the heart. The superior vena cava is the major vein coming from the upper regions of the body, whereas the inferior vena cava is the major vein coming from the lower regions of the body. Both vena cavae pump blood back into the right atrium of the heart in preparation to start the circuit all over again. Obviously, the heart is responsible for the movement of blood through the body. The cardiac cycle is the rhythmic contractions of the heart. There are 2 phases of a heartbeat, diastole and systole. Diastole is the period of time when the heart relaxes. During this phase, blood flows into all 4 chambers of the heart at once. Systole is when the heart contracts. First, the atria, both right and left, will contract, forcing all blood into the ventricles. This only takes about 1/10 of a second. Then both ventricles will contract, sending blood to either the lungs or to the body organs. This second stage of systole needs to be a stronger contraction since the heart is sending blood a longer distance. Therefore, the ventricles take about 3/10 of a second to contract. The timing and coordination of the beating heart is controlled by a natural pacemaker. The pacemaker is comprised of special muscle tissue in the wall of the right atrium that generates electrical impulses to force the heart to beat. This sinoatrial node produces an electrical impulse that tells the atria to contract. Then the electrical impulse travels to the atrioventricular node, which uses that impulse then to force the ventricles to contract. Please note that the atrioventricular node is also in the right atrium, but on the wall of the ventricle. Let's now take a moment and look at blood vessels. Large vessels, arteries, and veins are lined on the inside by an epithelium. Smooth muscle tissue then surrounds the epithelium and regulates blood flow by constricting or relaxing. Connective tissue then lines the outside, allowing vessels to stretch and recoil. Of interesting note is that one-way valves are present only in veins. Because of the lower blood pressure in veins, these one-way valves prevent blood backflow as it is returning to the heart. The capillaries, the site of nutrient and gas exchange, are very tiny vessels comprised of epithelial cells only. Only one blood cell can pass through a capillary at a time and allow for the most efficient exchange between the bloodstream and tissues through interstitial fluid. Interstitial fluid is a watery solution between cells that allows for the diffusion of nutrients. Blood, as we've been discussing, is the tissue in the body responsible for transporting gas and nutrients. Blood is 55% plasma, and plasma is a solution containing water, dissolved proteins, salts, nutrients, wastes, and oxygen and carbon dioxide. So blood is 55% of this plasma and 45% cellular. The cellular component includes red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, are responsible for transporting oxygen. Red blood cells contain molecules of hemoglobin in the plasma membrane that transport oxygen. They are smaller than most cells, lack a nucleus, and are disc-shaped because they do not have that nucleus. All these features allow for a greater surface area, meaning more hemoglobin to carry oxygen. If someone has anemia, they have low hemoglobin levels from having low red blood cell counts, perhaps resulting from blood loss, a vitamin and mineral deficiency, cancer, etc., etc. The second major type of cells found in the blood are white blood cells, or leukocytes. These cells are responsible for fighting infection, and as opposed to red blood cells, white blood cells do have a nucleus, but they do not have hemoglobin. There are much fewer of these in the blood than red blood cells. Finally, the last type of cell found in blood are platelets. Platelets are membrane-bound bits of cytoplasm coming from cells in the bone marrow. Platelets adhere to the edges of a break and form a sticky cluster. Once adhered, they release clotting factors that convert the protein fibrinogen to fibrin to further clot and reduce blood loss. Fibrin makes a net around a break, a scab. Individuals with hemophilia have a recessive genetic mutation in the gene for clotting factors. Their blood doesn't clot well, if at all, and they are at risk for bleeding to death. Hemophilia was present in the European royal families for a number of generations. You'll see in this pedigree, only males had the hemophilia trait, whereas females were carriers. Stop and review for a moment. What type of genetic transmission is this? Where is that recessive gene located? This concludes part 2 of our discussion on circulatory and respiratory systems. I now refer you to part 3 regarding animal respiration.